I would bet that you are not studying anywhere nearly as effectively as you could be. And why should you care? Well, if you study more effectively, you can learn more and retain more in less time. That translates to less time studying, better grades, and more time doing the things you actually enjoy.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Syafiq bin Isa. So, we as a student, we will always encounter some students who are very rude to their lecturers, to their teachers. Sometimes they are in lack of ethics, in questionnaire ethics or answering ethics. They are in lack of everything. So, one of the main point why we should talk about ethics is because one of the things that make you easier to understand knowledge is when you respect your teacher, you respect your lecturer. So in our video, one of the things that we are going to share is about why are people or more specifically students are in lack of ethics. Most notably is student of knowledge. People who learn at universities, where we see them as a very highly intellectual, as an intelligent students or an intellectual kind of prospect, but they are in lack of ethics. So in this video, we are going to introduce you on how to overcome ethics, or we are going to talk about what is ethics and so on. Thank you.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Ainul binti Uthman. I would like to present about putting common sense ethics into practical. The first step to becoming a person of character and integrity is choosing consciously to live in accord with ethical principles. Next come discernment and intellectual understanding so that you can discover what these moral principles are. Heraclitus said that those who are lovers of wisdom must be encouraged into many things. The way to gain knowledge is to sincerely enjoy learning and not to be impatient of what you don't understand. You gain intellectual knowledge through the use of reason and the left brain. Through reading, critical thinking, and debate, you become better able to discern truth. You must become a critical and clear thinker in order to understand everything from the logos to ethics. Yet someone be incredibly erudite and educated and still not ethical. Why? Because you have to care enough about principle to put ethics into practice in your life. And that takes real work. Care is the second step. You have to care in order to bring about any achievement. Care and the emotional faculty in generally associate with the right brain. To care about ethics is to discipline yourself to do what is right and refrain what conduct will harm others every day. You must care enough to improve yourself and to build and perfect your character, which was historical the aim of many Eastern and Western schools of thought, from Stoicism to Vendetta.
Firstly, growing up is an unhealthy environment is the result. An ethical individual cause a student lack of common sense. This is because an individual will begin to develop an ethic in themselves from childhood through emulating the behavior of their parents. So that's why a part of students not show a good ethical in their life. For example, parents who are involved drug symptoms, their children may be also trapped if they are not restrained and trained properly. Meanwhile, a peer also part of the cause lack of common sense, because peers are the one of the most powerful factor influencing in individual ethics. For example, socializing with peers who have a bad or negative attitude. Therefore, if this is not avoided, so it can affect to individuals' work ethic in an instance.
In conclusion, ethics and ethical behavior are no less prevalent or important in education, especially now, as our world seems to become both more connected and more divided every day. The ability to think and talk with others about ethical issues is more important than ever. We live in a world where ethical behavior is an afterthought. It's not likely to change anytime soon because our political leaders, members of the media, those in the entertainment field and sports all seem to have no clue about right and wrong. Why should students put time and effort into achieving the learning objective in their course? Courses should challenge students to learn, grow, and develop. Instructors have an ethical responsibility to not waste students' time, effort, and money. That's all from us. Thank you.
I just wish I was studying like this sooner. Without further ado, let's get to it. First, active versus passive learning. The default studying pattern we all employ is passive learning. It's easier, requires less effort, and overall is just more comfortable. Active learning is more challenging, it's less comfortable, but it's much more effective. There are 4 steps we must address to actually use active learning. Steps 1 and 2 are about obtaining the information, and steps 3 and 4 are about reviewing and reinforcing the information. The first step is to identify what is important. Not all information is created equal. To employ active learning, you must constantly be sorting information and assessing its relative importance. Second, organize the information in a way that you understand. Again, as an active process, this isn't going to be just copying and regurgitating the information. Instead, you're going to be doing the difficult task of synthesizing the information in your own words, in diagrams, or in other study aids. For example, I loved creating tables and charts. Let's say I was comparing macrominerals like sodium, potassium, and chloride in the GI system. I would take the extra time and effort to extract the relevant information and organize it in a chart format. The process of creating this chart was enough to improve my understanding of the concepts, and now I also had an excellent study tool to review at a later date. Number 3, memorize. You need to memorize the information in an active way. I'll get to how to do that later. And lastly, apply the information. You can do practice questions from the textbook or online services. Old practice tests or practice quizzes from your professor are also fantastic resources. Next, let's talk about your studying environment. This is an area requiring more personalization, so it's key that you figure out what works best for you. First, the location. Do you prefer coffee shops and libraries or studying at home? If you've seen the video of my workspace, then you understand why I love studying at home. Many people do, however, get easily distracted at home, and that's why they prefer the coffee shop or library since it helps them focus on the work at hand. Next, group versus solo studying. Are you studying by yourself or with other people? My split varied, but it was roughly 50-50, maybe a little bit more time studying solo. In group study, the rate of reviewing material is slower, but the main benefit is working through and reinforcing difficult concepts while also keeping you motivated and sane. That being said, groups need to be small. Study with only 1 or 2 other people. Groups larger than this have severely diminishing returns because you are going to get distracted and your productivity will plummet. One of the biggest advantages to group study is the ability to teach what you have learned. This teaching reinforces the material for yourself, and you also help out your friends and classmates. I go over how to use this strategy in my Feynman technique video. Now, there is a trade-off between novel stimuli and maintaining a routine. Novel stimuli, such as varying your study location, has been demonstrated to improve recall and retention. However, for some this works directly against the benefits of a routine. The routine of waking up at the same time, studying in the same place, etc. may facilitate productivity and fight off procrastination. The novel stimuli of studying in new locations and with new people may impede your ability to get into the groove and maintain productivity long term. I found myself studying in usually the same spaces. Either I was in my med school in the empty classrooms, which is when I usually did group study, or I was at home studying solo with my optimal setup. Now, in terms of timing and pacing, One of my all-time favorite study hacks is the Pomodoro technique. Essentially, you focus on one task, study in these 25-minute blocks, take 5-minute breaks, and it sounds very simple, but it actually is super effective at fighting procrastination, improving your focus, and maintaining endurance. I go over how you can use it most effectively in my Pomodoro video. Third, let's talk about obtaining the information. Generally, you're going to be obtaining information in one of two ways as a pre-med, either lecture or textbooks. During lecture, most of us follow along with our own copy of the PowerPoint, and we just take notes in the comment section. This is a very passive way of learning. Here are some other options to improve your methods of obtaining information. First, consider writing versus typing your notes. Each, of course, has its pros and cons. Typing is faster, which sounds great initially, but if you type faster, you are able to transcribe what the professor is saying verbatim. That is not good. This is a very passive way of taking notes. By writing, you generally write much slower, and therefore you have to emphasize the important information and rephrase and organize it into your own words. Writing, in comparison to typing, has also been demonstrated to improve recall, possibly due to the increased motor coordination required for writing. When I was in med school, styluses aren't what they are today, and I opted for typing in some classes and writing on paper in others, particularly for my summary sheets, which we'll get to later. But now with the Surface Pro and the iPad Pro with Apple Pencil, you can get the best of both worlds. Check out my video on how to most effectively take notes with the iPad and Apple Pencil. Second, let's talk about lecture versus podcast. Your school may offer audio or video recordings of your lectures, and for me, this worked best. However, there are, of course, distinct advantages to attending lectures in person. For lecture, you have this set routine and you're surrounded by other people who are doing the exact same thing. It helps reduce distraction and encourages you to be engaged in the lecture, at least more so than if you were listening to a podcast at home. You're also able to ask questions in real time. But the podcast, on the other hand, gives you the flexibility to watch whenever you want, meaning you can watch the lecture on your own schedule when you're well rested and feeling fresh. You can also watch it at increased speeds. I personally opted for 1.5 or 2 times playback speed. Zoning out with slow-speaking lectures was a big issue for me, and that's why I love the ability to speed up the podcast, because it helped keep me engaged and focused. That being said, be careful of the temptation of podcasting because it requires a great deal of discipline to stay on track and not fall behind. If you are the type of student who would procrastinate with podcasting, do yourself a favor and stick to attending lectures instead. Okay, now let's talk about rewatching lectures. This is a total waste of time. I understand the thought process behind it. You want to make sure you didn't miss anything important, and you want to reinforce the content, repetition. The problem is that rewatching lectures is extremely passive, even more so than attending it the first time. Your time is better spent reviewing the information, synthesizing it, and doing active learning, questions, flashcards, etc. Do not rewatch the lectures or re-listen to recordings. Use your textbook, other resources, your classmates, or your professor's office hours if you need clarification. Now let's move on to textbooks. I used to highlight my textbooks and read my highlights several times to review prior to exams, but that's obviously a terribly passive way to study. Reviewing your PowerPoint slides or Word documents is also equally ineffective. Instead, make the process as active as you can, even at the time of initial exposure. Using either your computer or notepad, summarize what you read into your own words. By doing this, you are identifying the important information and organizing it in a way that you will understand. This whole process will ultimately drastically improve your recall during test time.